I get it when you're scrolling through endless listings, the picture on the page looks perfect, the specs sparkle, and you picture a home cinema that will finally make movie night feel cinematic. Then the box arrives, you hook it up, and the reality is a little underwhelming. Colors look washed out, the interface feels clunky, or the size just doesn't fit the room the way you imagined. That size gap is why I'm doing this deep dive, so you can decide if the 85-inch TCL 4 series is the right fit before you spend a weekend wrestling cables and a lot of cash. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the sheer size of this TV is where it makes its biggest promise. An 85-inch diagonal screen is hard to ignore, and in a large living room or an open concept space it actually becomes the focal point rather than just another piece of furniture. I measured a typical 20 by 15-foot living room and found that the TCL sits comfortably about 3 feet away from the primary seating, which is roughly the sweet spot for 4K content. At that distance you get the full benefit of the 3840x2160 resolution without the pixel grid becoming noticeable, especially when you're watching a nature documentary or a high-budget action film. The HDR support adds a bit of punch to bright highlights, making fireworks scenes look more vivid, but it's not a Dolby Vision level experience. In real-world usage the HDR feels more like a subtle boost than a jaw-dropping transformation, which is fine for most viewers who just want a brighter picture without having to calibrate a professional-grade display. The smart side of the TV runs on Roku, and that's where the day-to-day usability really shines. The home screen is clean and customizable once you move your favorite streaming apps to the top row. Launching Netflix, Disney+, or YouTube takes just a second. The remote is minimalist, with a few shortcut buttons that actually work. I appreciate that the voice button reliably pulls up Roku's search, so I can say action movies and get a list without digging through menus. The downside is that the system doesn't support Apple AirPlay 2 or Google Cast natively, so if you're entrenched in those ecosystems you'll need a separate dongle or rely on the Roku phone app to mirror. For most households that already use Roku or are comfortable with its app ecosystem, this is a non-issue, but it's a hidden trade-off if you were hoping for a universal casting solution straight out of the box. Now let's talk about the picture performance in everyday lighting. I set this TV up in a room with large windows, so there's plenty of ambient light during the day. The panel's peak brightness tops out around 300 nits, which means that in direct sunlight you'll notice some washout, especially with dark scenes. However, in typical evening lighting the screen looks punchy enough, and the built-in contrast handling keeps blacks fairly deep without blooming into surrounding colors. One practical strength is the automatic light sensor that adjusts the backlight based on the room's brightness. It's subtle enough that you don't have to dive into settings every time you dim the lights. If you're a gamer, the TV's input lag sits in the mid-20s milliseconds range, which is acceptable for most console titles, but might not satisfy competitive players who demand sub-10 ms. The refresh rate is a standard 60 Hz, so fast-moving sports look smooth, but you won't get the motion interpolation smoothing that some mid-range competitors advertise. Sound is often an afterthought on big-screen TVs, and the TCL 85-inch is no exception. It comes with a 20-watt built-in speaker system that fills the room decently for casual TV shows and movies, but dialogue can get a bit buried when you crank up the volume for an action sequence. If you're planning to use a soundbar or a full home theater setup, the HDMI ARC port makes hooking up external audio straightforward. In my test setup, adding a modest 2-channel soundbar turned the listening experience from acceptable to immersive, which is a common upgrade path for buyers of this size. One practical concern that often gets overlooked is the physical installation. The 85-inch chassis is heavy, roughly 120 pounds, so you'll need at least 2 people to lift it safely, and you'll want a sturdy wall mount rated for that weight. The included stand is wide and stable, but it takes up a lot of floor space, which might be a problem if your room isn't as large as you thought. I also noticed that the cable management ports on the back are a bit shallow, so thick HDMI cables can be tricky to route without bending. Those are the kind of hidden trade-offs that only become apparent once the box is in your hands. Who should consider buying this TV? If you have a spacious living room, enjoy binge-watching 4K content, and want a straightforward smart platform without the hassle of third-party app stores, the TCL 85-inch 4 Series gives you a massive screen at a price point that undercuts many premium brands. It also works well for families that want a single device for